Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When former crime scene investigator Eric Drake retreats to a secluded woodland home for peace, he expects silence until a relentless HOA queenpin declares war. Lies, trespassing, and forged claims spiral into a battle for reality itself. Welcome to Silver Bluffs, where the rules are deadly. I bought the house at the end of last autumn when the leaves were turning copper and the air smelled like firewood and rain. It wasn't just any house. It was a secluded gem built in the early 50s, standing stubbornly on 12 acres of hilly woodland in northern Virginia, the kind of place that makes you feel like you've stepped out of time. The driveway curled up from the main road like a silver ribbon, ending at a weathered gate that I replaced with a solid steel frame one the first week after moving in. The house itself had bones of stone and brick, with thick walls, a deep porch, and windows that stared across the valley toward the pristine rooftops of Silver Bluffs, a newer community of cloned luxury homes with lawns so manicured they looked like green plastic. I left my career as a crime scene investigator behind with the same finality that I locked the door to my old apartment. Too many years of seeing the worst parts of humanity had pushed me toward silence, solitude, and the kind of peace that doesn't involve bloodstains in courtrooms. Here, I could breathe. My mornings were slow, filled with the sound of wind moving through the pines, and my evenings spent sipping coffee on the porch, watching the sunlight crawl down the slopes and turn the glass windows of Silver Bluffs into glowing squares. I thought I'd found the perfect retreat from everything. The first sign that this retreat wasn't as isolated as I hoped came about 2 months after I moved in. I found a glossy HOA brochure tucked neatly under the gate's latch. At first, I thought it was some generic flyer. It was titled Welcome to Silver Bluffs Community, and inside was a list of rules that read like an absurd manifesto: paint colors for mailboxes, approved lawn decorations, and even specific garbage bin heights. My favorite rule? Holiday lights must be white and no longer than 30 feet per residence. I laughed out loud. This had nothing to do with me. My house wasn't even part of their development. I tossed it in the recycling bin without a second thought. 2 days later, I was out on the porch tightening a loose railing when a woman approached my gate like she owned the world. She had that kind of deliberate walk that screamed, "I'm here to inspect you." Mid-40s, a sharp blonde bob, yoga pants that looked more expensive than my entire toolkit, and sunglasses the size of satellite dishes. She didn't even greet me, just smiled that particular kind of smile I know too well from interrogations. Fake friendly with an undertone of, "I know something you don't." "Hello," she said, resting her manicured hand on my gate. "You must be the new resident. I'm Karen Lomax, president of the Silver Bluffs Homeowners Association. I just wanted to say it's nice you're fixing up our old property." I wiped my hands on my jeans, studying her. "Your property? I think there's a mistake. This is my home, and it's not part of Silver Bluffs." Her smile widened, but her eyes tightened. "Oh, I understand the confusion. Technically, your house is part of Silver Bluffs, historically speaking. We've discussed this at our meetings, and we'd love to reinstate your property in the HOA registry. It's better for everyone." "Not happening," I said flatly. "I checked every record before I bought this place. This property has never been part of your HOA, and I have the title and legal documents to prove it." Karen tilted her head like I was a stubborn child. "Sometimes records get messy. We can fix that for you. I'll have my office update the ownership registry." That was when I realized she wasn't just nosy. She was bold. The kind of bold that doesn't understand the word no. "No thanks," I replied, walking toward the gate and leaning on it. "There's nothing to fix. This is my land. End of story." Her lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "We'll see," she said, her voice soft, but her tone dripping with challenge. She turned and walked back to her gleaming SUV parked by the road, her steps sharp and deliberate. I watched her drive away, a pit forming in my stomach. I'd seen people like her before in court cases, people who believed rules were weapons meant for everyone but themselves. The thought crossed my mind that this wasn't going to be the last I saw of Karen Lomax. That evening, as the sun went down and the forest around me hummed with crickets, I stood on my porch and looked across at the distant glow of Silver Bluffs. It wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It felt like a watchtower, and Karen Lomax was perched in it, scanning my land like a hawk. The days after Karen's visit were quiet at first, though it wasn't the comfortable silence I'd grown used to. It was the kind of quiet that feels like someone is holding their breath just out of sight. I tried to ignore it, pouring my energy into small projects around the property, repainting the porch steps, trimming the old hedges along the driveway, and setting up a proper security light system. Still, there was this nagging feeling that I was being watched, and not by deer or foxes, but by human eyes. The first odd thing happened at the post office. I went to pick up a package, and the clerk, an older guy I'd seen a few times, looked at me strangely when I gave him my address. "You're on the Lomax property, right?" he asked casually as he handed over my box. I frowned. "Number that's my place. The title says Drake, not Lomax." He muttered something under his breath and gave me a weird half smile like I was part of some joke I didn't get. Later that week, I ran into one of the Silver Bluffs residents, a guy named Joe I'd briefly chatted with before, outside the hardware store. Joe was a tall man with kind eyes, a doctor at the local clinic. He hesitated before speaking. "Listen," he said quietly, leaning closer as if sharing a secret. "Is it true you're renting that place? Karen's been saying you're just taking care of it until she finishes some legal process." I laughed out loud, probably too loud. "Renting? Number you. That's my house. Bought it with my money, clean title and all. Where did you even hear that?" Joe glanced around nervously. "Karen's been talking to everyone. Says you're some, I don't know, ex-patient or something, living there under her supervision." My jaw nearly hit the pavement. "You're kidding me," I said. "She actually said that?" He nodded. "Yeah, man. Just figured you'd want to know." When I got back home, I found my mailbox stuffed with letters and HOA pamphlets addressed to Karen Lomax, property owner. The implication was crystal clear. Karen was trying to rewrite reality, one fake mailer at a time. I grabbed the pile, took a photo of it for evidence, and tossed it all into a drawer. I wasn't sure if I was more annoyed or amused. Probably both. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of strong coffee, going through my property documents again. Deed, title, survey maps, all stamped and signed. Everything was ironclad. But knowing people like Karen, facts wouldn't stop her. She wasn't playing by the rules. She was writing her own. I decided to make it official. The next morning, I called the county property office and asked them to notify me of any activity regarding my parcel. I wanted to see if Karen was pulling anything sneaky. The clerk on the line hesitated when I mentioned Karen's name. "Funny you ask," she said. "There's been a recent request to update ownership records for your property, filed by Northridge Land Survey." I paused, gripping the phone tighter. I've never heard of them. "Who authorized that?" She scrolled through her screen. "The request lists Karen Lomax as the applicant. It hasn't been processed yet because some details didn't add up." My pulse quickened. "Don't process anything. Flag it for fraud if you have to." She promised to hold it for review and send me a copy. By the time I hung up, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a game of territory, and Karen was trying to stake her claim like some suburban warlord. I looked out at my land, the pine trees swaying in the breeze, the gravel driveway I had laid myself, the house I'd restored with my own two hands, and I felt something old stir inside me. That investigative instinct I thought I'd buried when I left my job. I wasn't going to let anyone rewrite my life. The next day, I caught sight of Karen's white SUV parked at the edge of the Silver Bluffs cul-de-sac, angled just enough for her to stare at my gate. She didn't wave. Neither did I. I stood there for a long moment, arms crossed, until she finally drove away. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I pulled up to my gate after a quick run into town and spotted something that made my stomach twist. Two men in green uniforms were strolling around my front yard, trimming the grass with electric trimmers like they owned the place. A pickup truck marked with the Silver Bluffs HOA logo sat parked halfway up my driveway, blocking my path. I stepped out of my truck and shouted, "Hey, who the hell told you to come onto my property?" The older of the two men, holding a hedge clipper, looked up calmly and said, "We're here on Mrs. Lomax's orders." She wanted the property to meet HOA standards. I laughed sharply, though there was no humor in it. "Mrs. Lomax doesn't own this land. I do. You're trespassing. Pack your gear and leave." The man shrugged, clearly not eager to get caught in the middle. "Sir, we were just told to clean up." "We're not looking for trouble." I recorded a quick video on my phone, making sure to get their faces and the HOA logo on the truck. "Trouble's already here," I said. "You've got 5 minutes to get off my land, or I call the cops." They left in a hurry, muttering something about how she didn't mention it wasn't her property. When the truck disappeared down the road, I walked back to my porch and noticed something even worse. 3 new signs nailed to my wooden posts at the gate. Big white boards with bold black letters. Private property, members only, Silver Bluffs HOA. My hands tightened around the hammer I fetched from the shed. I yanked each sign out of the posts, tossing them into the back of my truck like trash, but not before taking more photos for evidence. By that evening, I had set up 2 additional security cameras facing the gate and driveway. I wasn't about to play guessing games about who came and went. I also installed a motion sensor floodlight that could make a raccoon look like a deer caught in a police interrogation. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. The following morning, as I drank my coffee, a letter slid under my gate. No postage, just hand-delivered arrogance. It was printed on Silver Bluffs HOA letterhead and addressed to resident. According to this little masterpiece of fiction, I was in violation of community standards, including unauthorized exterior modifications and failure to maintain uniform. Aesthetics. The kicker. A warning that fines would begin if I didn't rectify the infractions within 30 days. I nearly spit out my coffee from laughing. Fines. For not belonging to their little Stepford cult. I called Karen that afternoon. She answered on the second ring, her tone dripping with fake politeness. "Hello, Eric. I assume you received our notice?" "I received something, all right," I said, keeping my voice even. "Let me make this simple. Your landscapers trespassed on my property. Your signs are on my property. And if you don't stop this nonsense, I will involve law enforcement." There was a brief pause before she replied, sweet as poison. "Eric, this doesn't need to be hostile. We're simply trying to bring your home up to our community standards. It benefits everyone." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "I don't belong to your community, Karen. Not legally, not socially, not ever. The only standard here is my patience, and you're running out of it." I hung up before she could answer. The quiet after that call felt loaded, like the calm before a storm. That night, I found myself double-checking the locks on my doors and scanning the footage from my security cameras. Nothing. Just the trees swaying under the moonlight, the gravel driveway glinting under the floodlight, and the eerie thought that I was being pushed into a war I hadn't signed up for. By Friday, I had already compiled a folder of photos, videos, and recordings documenting every intrusion. Something told me I'd need them sooner rather than later. Karen didn't strike me as someone who gave up. She struck me as someone who escalated. The next week started with a knock on my door at 8 in the morning, and not the kind of polite knock you give a neighbor. It was sharp, demanding, like someone trying to summon me to judgment. I opened the door to find 2 county deputies standing there, hands resting near their holsters, their cruiser idling in my driveway. For a second, I wondered if Karen had actually convinced them of something insane. "Mr. Drake?" the taller deputy asked. "We got a call about a potentially dangerous individual residing here without permission." My jaw tightened. Let me guess. Karen Lomax made the call. The 2 exchanged glances but said nothing. I invited them in and calmly laid out every document I had. My deed, my title, the county records with my name stamped in black ink. "Gentlemen, this is my property. I own it outright. I don't rent. I don't squat. I don't belong to the Silver Bluffs HOA. And I sure as hell am not dangerous unless someone decides to cross my fence." The older deputy gave a slow nod, flipping through the paperwork. "Looks solid. We'll make a note of this." I handed them a flash drive with clips from my security cameras showing Karen's landscapers trespassing and her SUV parked across my gate. "Keep this in the report," I said, "because I guarantee this won't be the last call you get." That afternoon, I drove down to the county office to see the property registrar in person. The clerk behind the counter was a tired-looking woman in her 50s, her desk buried under paperwork. When I asked about any recent filings on my property, she frowned. "Funny you should ask," she said, pulling up my file. "We had a submission last week that tried to update the owner's name to Karen Lomax. It was flagged because it came from a company called North Ridge Land Survey. Never heard of them. They didn't include proper verification." She handed me a copy of the submission, and my blood boiled. It listed me as property manager and Karen as primary owner. The audacity was staggering. "Do me a favor," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Flag every document that comes through with her name on it, and if possible, forward me copies. I want a paper trail." She nodded, clearly amused by the absurdity. "You're not the first to have trouble with that HOA," she muttered. "They think they run the whole county." By the end of the week, things started turning downright hostile. I came home one evening to find a handwritten note tucked into my mailbox. No envelope, just big looping letters that read, "You're not welcome here. This property belongs to Silver Bluffs. Leave while you still can." I stared at it for a good minute before tearing it in half and tossing it in the trash. That night, I left all my cameras rolling just in case. 2 days later, another patrol car rolled up my driveway after another anonymous complaint, this time claiming a paranoid armed man was threatening neighbors. The deputy recognized me immediately. "We're getting tired of this," he admitted, "but we have to check every call." I showed him the footage of my perfectly uneventful day. Me cleaning tools in the shed, me sipping coffee on the porch, me doing a whole lot of nothing illegal. He left, shaking his head, but I could feel the frustration building in my chest like a slow fire. By then, I'd had enough. I called my attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Linda Cross who had handled land disputes for years. I laid out the entire mess. The trespassers, the signs, the false HOA notices, and now the bogus police calls. She listened silently. And when I finished, she said, "Document everything. Keep your cool, but keep building your case. People like Karen crumble when the evidence piles up. I'll draft a cease and desist letter and serve it directly to her." The following morning, I watched from my porch as a courier handed Karen the letter across the fence of Silver Bluffs. Even from a distance, I could see her lips tighten into that same smug smile. She crumpled the letter and tossed it into her trash like it was nothing. That was when I realized Karen wasn't just stubborn. She was playing a game I'd have to end myself. I spent the next few days in a strange mix of irritation and grim amusement. Every time I thought Karen couldn't escalate her nonsense, she found a new level of crazy. On Wednesday morning, I received an official-looking envelope from the county property office. Inside was a copy of an amended record request listing Karen Lomax as primary owner and me as occupant manager. My name, my land, all rewritten in bold black letters like I was a tenant on my own property. It wasn't just delusion anymore, it was a calculated move. I drove straight to the county office, slammed the document on the clerk's desk, and demanded to know how this garbage had even been filed. The clerk sighed, clearly as annoyed as I was. "This came through an external submission portal," she explained. "It's supposed to be used by certified surveyors or legal representatives. This one listed a company called Northridge Land Survey, but we can't find any record of that company in the state registry. It's like they don't exist." My blood ran cold. "Because they don't," I said flatly. "This is fraud. Somebody is using a dead company to sneak false claims into the county database." I asked for copies of every single document filed by this phantom company and took them home to comb through. By evening, my kitchen table looked like a detective's war room, pages spread out, sticky notes, my laptop open with old county records pulled up. I noticed something immediately. The digital signature on the false records belonged to a land surveyor who, as my quick search confirmed, had died 3 years ago. Whoever was behind this wasn't just desperate. They were bold enough to dig up names of the dead. It made my skin crawl. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't slowing down in her personal campaign. She posted on a local community Facebook page that she was concerned about a drifter squatting on Silver Bluffs property and claimed she was working with the HOA board to restore the home to its rightful owner. A neighbor I barely knew showed me screenshots over coffee at the diner. I stared at the posts in disbelief. "She's gone off the deep end," I muttered, scrolling through the comments. Most people didn't engage, but a few posted things like, "Karen, are you sure about this?" Or, "That guy fixed up the house. It doesn't look abandoned at all." It was time to fight fire with fire. I called Linda, my attorney, and gave her everything. Photos of Karen's trespassers, her fake signs, copies of the fraudulent documents, even screenshots of her public lies. "This isn't just harassment anymore," Linda said. "This is textbook fraud and defamation. We need to go after her hard. I'll get a property fraud report filed with the county and push this to law enforcement." I felt a bit of relief, knowing I wasn't the only one seeing how insane this had become. That night, I noticed Karen's white SUV crawling past my gate for the third time in an hour. She slowed down like she was inspecting my fence line, her headlights sweeping across my yard. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, making sure she saw me watching her. She sped up and disappeared down the road, but I knew she'd be back. People like Karen don't stop because someone tells them to. They stop when they're forced to. I decided to dig deeper. My old instincts as a criminalist kicked in. I started pulling background information on Karen Lomax. Public records, old court filings, property disputes, anything I could find. It didn't take long to discover a pattern. 2 years ago, she'd tried to sue a neighbor over a strip of land that wasn't hers, claiming it was part of the original HOA boundaries. The court dismissed the case, calling her claims baseless and fabricated. It was a gold mine of ammunition. By midnight, I had a thick file on my laptop named Karen vs. Reality. I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going to dismantle whatever twisted empire she thought she was building. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt a little spark of satisfaction. By the time the weekend rolled around, I had turned my quiet house into a makeshift command center. I spent hours cross-referencing public records, piecing together Karen's history like I was building a case for trial, which, frankly, I probably was. My former colleagues from the Bureau always said I had a knack for patterns, and Karen's past was a pattern of entitlement with a capital E. Aside from that failed lawsuit 2 years ago, she had multiple HOA disputes on record, ranging from petty complaints about someone's mailbox color to borderline harassment of homeowners over non-compliant holiday decor. She wasn't just a busybody. She was a repeat offender. I sent copies of her past disputes to Linda. She called me almost immediately. "Eric, this is exactly what we need. It shows a pattern of behavior, intimidation, and false claims. I'm going to prepare a harassment complaint and request a protective order if she keeps this up." I could hear the steel in her voice. Linda was the kind of attorney who could slice through nonsense like a hot knife through butter. That night, I noticed something strange on my security feed. A car parked just beyond the tree line near the edge of my property. It wasn't Karen's white SUV, but I knew a surveillance stakeout when I saw one. A few minutes later, my cameras caught a figure walking along the fence line, taking pictures with their phone. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. "Hey!" I shouted across the yard. The figure froze, then bolted to the car and drove off. The license plate was partially visible on my footage, but I had a pretty good idea who sent them. The next morning, I confronted one of the HOA board members, a man named Todd, as he was walking his dog near the entrance to Silver Bluffs. "Todd," I said, "why is Karen sending people to snoop on my property?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting on his feet. "Look, Eric, I don't know what Karen's doing. She's been intense lately. We didn't approve any of this. She just says it's all for the good of the community." I studied his face. He wasn't lying, at least not entirely. "Then tell her to back off," I said. "Next time someone trespasses, they're getting a visit from the sheriff." But Karen didn't back off. Later that week, I found another set of fraudulent papers had been filed, this time attempting to list Silver Bluffs HOA as a co-owner of my land. It was laughable, but also infuriating. I took the documents straight to Linda, who slammed her hand on the desk. "This woman is insane," she muttered. "I'm filing a formal complaint for property fraud and pushing this to the district attorney's office." I wasn't content to just let the legal wheels turn, though. I reached out to an old contact from my time in the field, a cybersecurity analyst named Ryan. He owed me a favor. Within days, Ryan dug into the digital trail left by Northridge Land Survey, the ghost company Karen had used. It turned out the submissions came from a single IP address tied to, surprise, Karen's home Wi-Fi. She hadn't even tried to cover her tracks. Armed with this information, I called Linda again. "We have her dead to rights," I said. "Digital evidence, witness statements, and a history of harassment." Linda laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. "This is going to blow up in her face, but we need to be careful. She's not rational. People like that get unpredictable when cornered." And Linda was right. I realized how unstable Karen was when I caught her SUV parked outside my gate again late one night, her headlights off. She wasn't moving, just sitting there like a predator, watching its prey. I walked down the driveway, phone in hand, recording the whole thing. When she saw me coming, she rolled down her window and smiled like nothing was wrong. "Just checking on the neighborhood," she said sweetly. "You never know who might be creeping around here." I stared at her, my jaw clenched. "You're the one creeping around here, Karen. Go home." She didn't leave right away. She just sat there, smiling that unnerving smile before finally starting the engine and driving off into the dark. I should have known things were going to explode sooner or later. Karen had gone from whispers and fake documents to bold, brazen acts of trespassing. It was a Saturday morning when the situation crossed the line into madness. I had gone into town for groceries, and when I returned, my gate was wide open. That alone made my blood pressure spike, because I always kept it locked. As I drove up the driveway, I spotted a small crowd gathered on my porch, and for a split second, I thought I had stumbled onto some bizarre open house event. Then I saw her. Karen stood at the center of it all, dressed like a realtor about to close a $1 million deal, clipboard in hand, guiding 4 strangers through my front yard. "And here we have the original brickwork from the 50s, she was saying, as if my home was hers to sell. One of the strangers, a man in a polo shirt, looked at me as I parked and frowned. Is that the current tenant?" he asked her. Karen glanced over her shoulder and gave me this sugary, condescending smile. "Oh, don't mind him. He's just taking care of the place while I'm handling the legal paperwork." I got out of my truck, slamming the door so hard the sound echoed through the trees. "Everyone out. Now." My voice was sharp, the kind of tone I used to use at crime scenes when civilians wandered where they didn't belong. The strangers looked stunned, unsure of what was happening. Karen, however, had the gall to put a hand on her hip and say, "Eric, don't be rude. These are potential renters. I'm giving them a tour of my home." "Your home?" I laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. "This is my property and you've just broken into it. Get out." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 in front of everyone. "Hello. Yes, I have an intruder and a group of trespassers on my property. They've broken my lock. Send officers immediately." Karen's face flushed crimson. "How dare you? You're not even supposed to be here. I'll explain everything to the police when they arrive. They'll understand who the real owner is." Her voice was rising, hysterical, and the strangers quickly backed away, muttering apologies and hurrying to their cars. I stayed where I was, arms crossed, the phone still recording everything. When the sheriff's deputies arrived, I greeted them with my folder of documents already in hand. "Here's my deed, my title, and footage of this woman breaking into my home," I said, handing them both paper and my phone. Karen, on the other hand, launched into an incoherent rant about how I was delusional and squatting on her property. The deputies exchanged looks, and one of them asked her, "Ma'am, do you have any proof of ownership?" Karen waved her clipboard around like it was holy scripture. "All the proof you need is right here. Look at him. He's dangerous, unstable. He thinks this place belongs to him." The deputy turned to me, and I simply said, "Check the county records. They'll show my name, not hers." One of the deputies took Karen aside while the other went over my paperwork. It didn't take long before the first deputy returned, shaking his head. "Ma'am, none of what you're claiming checks out. This property is legally registered to Mr. Drake. Your trespassing and breaking in makes it criminal." Karen's response was to scream, not just argue, scream. She started yelling about conspiracies, about how the HOA owns everything here, and how this man is an imposter. When the deputies tried to calm her down, she shoved one of them and reached for the radio on his belt. That was it. They restrained her and put her in handcuffs while she kicked and spat insults at everyone, including me. One of the officers, a younger guy, shook his head and muttered, "I've seen some wild things, but this takes the cake." I gave a full statement while Karen sat in the back of the patrol car, still screaming about how I'd stolen her life. The deputies told me she'd be charged with trespassing, breaking and entering, and possibly resisting arrest. I handed over the security camera footage from my house as additional evidence. As they drove her away, I stood on my porch, my hands trembling from the adrenaline. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of the wind rushing through the trees. Then I realized I wasn't relieved. Not yet. People like Karen don't just disappear because they spend a night in jail. Karen's arrest should have been the end of it. At least, that's what any sane person would think. But sanity had left the building long before Karen set foot on my porch. By the next morning, she was out on bail and already back to stirring chaos. My phone buzzed with an email from Linda, my attorney. The subject line read, "She's gone nuclear." Inside was a scanned copy of a lawsuit Karen had filed against me. She was claiming I had illegally occupied her property, assaulted her with verbal threats, and caused emotional distress. The gall of this woman could power a small city. I met with Linda that afternoon. She looked over the papers with a kind of tired amusement. "This isn't going to hold up for 5 seconds," she said, flipping through the pages. "There's no evidence, and you have ironclad proof of ownership. But this will cost time, and that's what she wants. She wants to bleed you dry with nonsense." Linda leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "The good news? We're going to hit her harder. Property fraud, trespassing, harassment, and defamation. I'm also filing for damages. We'll make sure she regrets stepping onto your land." Meanwhile, the fallout in Silver Bluffs was spreading like wildfire. Todd, the HOA board member I'd spoken to before, stopped by my driveway as I was hauling wood. He looked exhausted, like someone who had spent the last week refereeing a war. "Eric, I need to tell you something," he said. "Most of the HOA board is fed up with Karen. She's been acting like she's queen of the community, and now with the police involved, everyone's nervous." I raised an eyebrow. Nervous or complicit? Todd grimaced. "Some of them knew she was trying to annex your property, but nobody expected her to go this far. We're calling an emergency meeting to figure out how to handle her." That evening, I decided to take stock of all my evidence, laying everything out on the dining table: legal documents, security footage, screenshots of her social media rants, even the HOA notices she had sent with her signature. I wanted a bulletproof case, but as I scrolled through the security camera archive, I found something that chilled me. At 2 a.m, the night after her arrest, a figure had walked up my driveway. Not Karen. This person was taller, wearing a hoodie, and carried what looked like a can of spray paint. On my front fence, I found the aftermath. Big red letters spelling out, "Get out, fraud." I called the sheriff's office and filed a report. The deputy who showed up recognized the handwriting immediately. "Karen's husband," he said, shaking his head. "We've had calls about him before. He's a piece of work. We'll look into it." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with Karen anymore. This was a whole family circus of entitlement. The next day, Linda and I prepared for the preliminary court hearing. We walked into the courthouse like we were entering enemy territory. Karen was already there, dressed in a bright white suit, sitting with her lawyer, a slick-looking guy who probably thought he was starring in a legal drama. She gave me that smug smile, the same one she had when she nailed her fake signs to my gate. I stared back, unblinking. I was done playing her games. The hearing was almost comical. Karen's lawyer tried to present her as a concerned community leader who had been misled by inaccurate property records. Linda destroyed that argument within minutes, waving copies of my deed and showing the fraudulent filings traced back to Karen's home IP address. Karen's face turned pale when that was mentioned. The judge wasn't amused by her theatrics. He denied her motion to claim ownership, noting that her evidence was not only insufficient, but potentially fabricated. But the best part? The judge ordered a full investigation into the fraudulent documents Karen submitted to the county. That's when I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. For the first time, I think she realized this was no longer a game she could win with lies and bluster. The investigation into Karen's fraudulent filings hit Silver Bluffs like a thunderclap. Within a week, county officials had subpoenaed digital records, and the evidence piled up fast. Ryan, my tech contact, sent me a detailed report tracing every fake document submission back to Karen's home network. It was all there. Timestamps, metadata, even the device ID of her laptop. When Linda presented this evidence to the district attorney, things escalated from a petty civil dispute to potential criminal charges. Meanwhile, Silver Bluff's HOA was crumbling under the weight of Karen's madness. Todd called me one evening, his voice shaking with frustration. "Eric, you won't believe what's happening. Half the board wants to remove Karen as president. She's been screaming at everyone, accusing us of conspiring with you. Last night, she even showed up at one guy's house at midnight, demanding he sign some letter supporting her claims. I could practically hear him rubbing his temples through the phone. The whole community is fed up. This isn't just about you anymore. She's taking us all down with her." Karen's behavior became increasingly unhinged. On Tuesday, she drove past my property 3 times, each time slowing down to glare through the gate. That night, my cameras caught her standing at the end of my driveway, muttering to herself. I didn't confront her. I just called the sheriff's office again. The deputy who arrived shook his head. "She's on thin ice," he said. "With these harassment reports, we can file a restraining order." Linda wasted no time. She filed for an emergency protective order, which the court granted. Karen was legally barred from coming within 100 yards of my property. Of course, I knew that wouldn't stop her for long. People like Karen believe rules apply to everyone but them. Then came the real bombshell. The county's digital forensics team confirmed that Karen had not only submitted false ownership documents, but had attempted to delete and alter existing property records. That crossed the line into felony territory, tampering with government data. The DA's office issued a warrant for further investigation, and rumors spread through Silver Bluffs like wildfire. Some neighbors even started reaching out to me directly, apologizing for believing her lies. Joe, the doctor, stopped by one afternoon with a sheepish smile. "Guess I owe you a beer," he said. "Karen's been telling everyone you'd be gone by now. Looks like you're the one still standing." But the tension didn't let up. The night before the official HOA board vote to remove Karen, I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of tires crunching on gravel. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window. Karen's SUV was parked right outside my gate again. I hit the record button on my phone and stepped outside. "You're violating the order, Karen," I shouted across the driveway. "Leave now, or I'll have you arrested again." She didn't move. She just stood there, hands trembling, eyes wide with some mix of rage and delusion. "You think you've won," she spat, her voice cracking. "This house is mine. It's always been mine." I called the sheriff's office on speakerphone so she could hear it. As soon as I mentioned her name, she bolted, speeding down the road like a ghost, vanishing into the dark. By the time the deputies arrived, she was long gone, but the footage was enough for them to add another violation to her record. "We're about one step away from having her held for psychiatric evaluation," the deputy told me. "This woman's not well." The following day, the HOA board officially voted to strip Karen of her presidency. Todd sent me a text. "She lost it, screamed at everyone, threw a chair. Police had to be called. I didn't even know what to say." The woman who had tried to rewrite reality was watching her own empire collapse, and I had a feeling she wasn't going down quietly. The morning after Karen's final meltdown, I woke to a knock on the door. This time, it wasn't an unwelcome surprise. It was the sheriff himself, a tall, weathered man with a look that said he'd seen far too much of Silver Bluff's drama lately. He came to inform me that Karen had been taken into custody for a psychiatric evaluation following her violent outburst at the HOA meeting. "She's not facing jail right now," he explained, "but she's going to a secure facility until the doctors clear her. She's a danger to herself and others." I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was a bone-deep exhaustion. For months, I'd lived under constant stress, every day waiting for the next letter, the next knock, the next absurd attempt to rewrite reality. Now with Karen gone, the silence felt heavy, almost too quiet. Todd stopped by that afternoon with a bottle of bourbon, shaking his head. "The board's under investigation now," he said. "The county's auditing everything, our funds, our property lines, all of it. Honestly, I don't blame them. Karen went too far, but some of us should have stopped her before it came to this." I poured us 2 glasses. "At least now people see her for who she is," I replied. Linda called me later that evening with good news. The county officially cleared my title and issued a written statement affirming that all fraudulent filings had been removed. She also informed me that I could sue Karen for damages, emotional distress, legal fees, even property devaluation caused by her harassment. I didn't even hesitate when I answered, "I'm not suing her. She needs help, not another war." There was a pause on the line, and then Linda said softly, "You're a better man than most." But I couldn't stay there anymore. The house, as much as I loved it, had been tainted by the chaos Karen unleashed. Every corner of the property reminded me of the paranoia, the nights I caught her SUV lurking, the red spray-painted threats on my fence, the sound of her voice screaming about a life that wasn't hers. A few weeks later, I put the house on the market. It sold faster than I expected, and for a good price. I didn't even look back when I handed over the keys. I found a new place, one even more isolated, tucked away near the edge of a federal wildlife reserve where the nearest HOA was miles away. No Karen, no board members, no fabricated rules about mailbox colors or lawn decorations. Just trees, open sky, and the peace I'd been chasing all along. Before I left, I hung a sign on the gate of my old property, a simple piece of wood I carved myself. It read, "Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is an idea that no one bothers to question." The day I drove away, I passed through Silver Bluffs one last time. Karen's house stood quiet, its blinds drawn, her SUV gone. Some neighbors waved at me as I passed, and I could see guilt in their eyes, maybe even shame for believing her lies. I didn't wave back, not out of anger, but because I was done with all of it. The fight, the madness, the whole twisted saga. It was finally over. As I pulled onto the open road, I felt that old heaviness lift from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't waiting for the next absurd scheme or knock on the door. I was just Eric Drake, a man in his truck, heading toward a quieter life, leaving behind a story so strange I wasn't sure anyone would believe it.